Plain black and white. Plain black and white. Plain black and white. Plain black and white. Plain black and white.
It's also good for people to see how things move over here when it comes to conflict internally. Because you can see how the other nations are getting a chance to see how when the Indians over here decide to raise their voice in one accord, things around the world shift. And ever since the FBAs have recognized their indigeneity, even though it's not right how they explain it, but just with that energy shift and that attention shift in that aspect, or just the fact that we weren't going to export that portion of our energy. How about that?
Man, we got some correction to go on with the Foundation of Black American History. We're going to be addressing this rumor or this popular myth that always goes around saying that, a lot of our foundational Black American music creations originated in Africa or are African, and we are really just pushing African culture over here. It got popularized over here. Hip hop didn't just come overnight. We just popped up one day. Some kids just started making music. Now it's a process coming from the elders, coming from their parents, coming from their grandparents. It's a long lineage of this. So last point I wanted to make, we are the only group of Black people in the world that they Africanize our music. If anybody asks the question, where does reggae come from? People are going to say the Caribbean or Jamaica. It's not going to be no ends and buts about it. It's not going to be, it comes from the Fulani people who had this back in ancient times. It comes from the Wolof tribe. They name all these random tribes. They can't never show us no recordings, no nothing of this music sounding similar. You dig? But it's always with foundational Black Americans, it always comes from some ancient African tomb in Kemet that we got it from and was just passed through our DNA. And what really pisses me off, brother, is when we talk about things like Afrobeat, they never give us credit. They never give us credit for Afrobeat, even though their forefathers like Fela Kuti gave us credit. He said, I got that from American jazz in my time in America. He was around with the Foundational Black American Grassroots and the Panthers Party out there in California. He was heavily impacted by foundational Black Americans, took that sound and mixed it with Afrofusion and created an Afrobeat. They never give us credit. They never give us credit for the reggaes. They never give us credit for the toasting. Any of their sound, they never give us credit. But whenever it comes to foundational Black American, they completely erase and strip it from us. So I find that very ironic. Brother DeJuan B, go ahead, man. The floor is yours, man. What's your thoughts on this?
It's so much to break down. He said, okay, the roots.
Mm-hmm.
There are no blues roots in Africa. Now, you will get, when you read books, academic books, everything is in let's be sorry by saying it, through the university system, they're always going to say there's African traces. That's what it takes to get your information published in the university in Maine, because there's a whole plot and a plan, and we all know that's the other anything Black Americans contribute. That's to ignore our inventions, and they can't ignore it, and they got to show it, they got to other it, like they tried to do with rock and roll, like what they do with our inventions, like what they do with George Washington Carver, like what they did with Benjamin Banneker and all of the John Henson and these Black people that put the damn Constitution together.
Black and white.
Not exporting that portion of energy, keeping it all in house, being a self-circumventing investment. then you can see how things have switched up. Because when you give your energy to a certain person, place, or thing, that person is only going to be able to perform at their best. Just like you can give the highest octane premium unleaded gas in the world to a Toyota that only goes 80 miles per hour. But it's still only going to go 80 miles per hour. But you can't give regular gas to a luxury car that goes 120 or 180, 220, because it's going to disqualify it from going to its full potential. But you can give a car with less horsepower the same quality gas as you give it from a premium car, and then it's only going to do as much as it can do. It's never going to be able to perform like the luxury car. That's the same thing with giving energy. It's like giving gas. You don't give premium unleaded energy to vehicles that can't go higher than a diesel engine. So that's what we've been doing. So when we give our energy to Africans who don't have the acumen that we have, then they get a chance for a season, for however long it is, to do what they want with it, but they can't produce what we can produce with it. So once you bring it back home, that energy alone, you get a chance to see how shit around the globe has to start shifting. Automatically, things start shifting. The ice raids.
Please touch word! Please touch word!
The Trump rallies. No Kings rallies. The shit happening in Iran and Israel. Shit happening between Gaza and Israel. There's a reason why in the Bible the real Israelites were told to keep themselves separate. They had legislation that dealt with diplomacy. Matter of fact, the whole Old Testament is all of the American law in one book. The USC, the USCAs, the Constitution, the amendments, the Law of Nations, the laws for the Treasury and the taxing of the levy. The word levy itself comes from Levi, who collected the taxes in the book of the Bible. Everything, all the rebels did in 1776 was take away the Bible and took out of it what would be useful for diplomacy only, but not for morality. But it was the morality that built up the treasury and the storehouses of the nation. It was the way that energy and thought and emotions have atomic weight. We call that weight spirit, but it has atomic weight just like oxygen has atomic weight, and you can't see that either. You can see fire, but that's not measured on the atomic weight scale. But they all hold the same translucent quality. So when you put your thoughts and your emotions towards your anthropological makeup, then it harmonizes. It gives a certain ring. There was rules for intermarriage with the Israelites. There was rules for foreign diplomacy. There was rules for immigration and the whole nine. But what made them a culture is that they were all told as an anthropology to do this certain thing at this time of the year, do this certain thing every day, say this certain thing, wear this certain thing, and that it wouldn't even matter if anybody else wore it because they wouldn't be able to conduct the same energy or get the same outcome as those it was designed for. So the whole diplomatic immigration process that you see being conducted by America and Israel today was completely opposite. The energy that was given to that treasury is completely opposite the reason that you're seeing it be exercised today. It wasn't for a exhortation from somebody or to extract a payment or tribute to somebody for nothing. None of our founding fathers did international business and maintain a stronghold overseas by strictly intellectual copyright. It's always been mechanical. It's never just been intellectual. Oh, I gave you the idea, so you owe me tribute. Now, maybe if you drilled, or maybe if you created the thing over there, then as long as it's standing and it's functional, you deserve some type of percentage, but not just for intellectual property alone. If you do receive tribute or a percentage from intellectual property alone, it should only be for a certain amount of time. If it's not your domicile, and if it's not your raw materials that is being used to build the structure, no. Now, if you're using if it's your intellectual property and plus natural resource plus labor or any combination of the two with the intellectual property though or copyright, but without that, this country wasn't built off of intellectual import. Nobody thought of nothing from the outside and brung it in to help build it. So that's kind of a equilibrium to how we didn't use just intellectual property to build it. It took mechanical rights. You had to perform something. Now, mechanics includes performance, but it also includes physical property, tangible negotiable instruments. Unless you perform a service. So you can imagine that the way people around the world like hip hop and the way people around the world are comfortable with the way Negroes exercise their culture, you know, in regards to what is exportable, that was the same thing that made America rich before the rebels did what they did in 1776. It was the part of the energy of the infrastructure of America since its founding in 1555. See, the rebels in 1776 was just rebellion against a government that was created in 1555. The only reason there was a Salem's witch trials is because there was a Supreme Court. The courts were already established in the 1600s, but the nation was founded in 1555. The rebels rebelled against that nation in 1776. And now the world is getting a chance to see that the America that was alleged to be abolished before 1776 is still here. And that the energy, or I should say the The economics that was part of the economics that were used to keep America afloat without tapping into their own natural resources was the entertainment of the Negroes, who, in alternative, were able to create agriculture and create industry with agriculture that they themselves did not partake of. So there was a lot of self-discipline, a lot of self-sacrifice to build the treasury up. It didn't happen by getting high off your own supply. And that's how you know that there was a paradigm shift, a real one, in regards to office seats, what they call Reconstruction. The seats are already there, but now it's time for the newly freed slaves to experiment with playing government. Except you got the wrong face when you think of that. You think blackface was just part of a minstrel for entertainment, but no, blackface was a representation of what was happening with Reconstruction. Is that there were a group of free white people that got a chance to do blackface with government. And the free Negroes a century before, who already had the look, did brickface with architecture and tried to copy our architecture with structures that just had the brick face. It didn't have the in-depth masonry that it involved to really interlay the brick on the real historical buildings in colonial architecture. They just knew how to make the brick face and the design. So the first revolution was about brick face and the second revolution was about blackface. But even in the brick face revolution, they did blackface to pretend that they were us Indians. It's called the Boston Tea Party, where all the colonists painted their faces black so they can look like Indians. But what you think that was for? Who you think they were painting their faces black for? Look like Indians, right? Well, there you go. They say that there were two governments on America before the rebellion. That there was the British Empire and the Iroquois Confederacy. That's because they're the same thing. Those black Indians were the British, and they were the Confederacy. And it says that in law. But somehow the movies were able to overwrite law. Somehow entertainment was used to oversee law. Whereas once entertainment was used to enforce law, once the newly freed slaves learned the tricks of the trade and could blackface their way into society, they used entertainment to overturn law. And learned it from the same people who created it to reiterate the law. And you can see that the way you know it's true is I'll show you the biggest modern example of brickface blackface. That's what we're going to call the rebellion from here on out. We're going to call it brickface blackface. We're not going to call it the Revolutionary War no more. We're going to call it brickface blackface. And one of the reasons you know that there was a brickface blackface movement is because of the rock and roll era in the 40s and the 50s and the modern hip hop movement. Now, before the Negroes and the Indians started doing rock and roll, there was nobody thinking about rock and roll. Everybody was still trying to do jazz like the Indians and the Negroes were doing in the 1800s. But the minute the brothers got a little more pep in their step and they started doing rock and roll, then here comes the world, which there's nothing wrong with that. But You got people who are labeled like the king, for example, Elvis Presley the king, when his most famous song was wrote by a black woman. You ain't nothing but a hound dog. You know how women call all men dogs? Yeah, this black lady, Big Mama Thornton, wrote this song about her man called You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog.
Let's do that again.
She did incredible picking. That's what really attracted Elvis was her picking, and he liked her singing too, but he liked that picking first.
She had a major impact on artists like Elvis Presley. When you see Elvis Presley singing early songs in his career, I think if you imagine that he is channeling Rosetta Tharpe, it's not an image that I think we're used to thinking about when we think about rock and roll history. We don't think about the black woman behind the young white man.
All the kids who grew up in the 40s and 50s knew of her as a superstar. And so I think it's very fair to say that there's a bit of her snuck up in all of rock and roll.
Blackboard Jungle at the time was a rather shocking film, and of course it was the instigating factor for rock and roll with Bill Haley with Rock Around the Clock. Of course, I had been listening to the black stations for years and adored rock and roll. I just thought it was fabulous stuff.
Pretty much the entire country knew that some kind of new music had arrived, and the term rock and roll had already been affixed to it.
Rock and roll is a river of music, which has absorbed many streams. Rhythm and blues, jazz, ragtime.
Big Joe Williams was throwing rock riffs into his pioneering blues sound as early as 1935, when he wrote and recorded the earliest known version of Baby Please Don't Go.
Baby, please don't.
The song has been remade throughout the years by many rock artists, surviving virtually unchanged from the Mississippi Delta.
Caledonia! What make your big head so hard? Mouth!
Louis Jordan was rocking with his own brand of big beat jazz in the 1940s, scoring an astonishing 57 R&B chart hits. In doing so, he drew up an easily followed blueprint for the progression of rock and roll.
There's a lot made out of the fact that rock and roll came out of rhythm and blues. Bill Haley and his Comets, in some ways, were really sort of like a white version of Louis Jordan and his Timpani 5. In fact, they had the same producer, and Bill Haley and his Comets replaced Louis Jordan at Decca.
Bill Haley was a strange phenomenon. Basically, Bill was a disc jockey in Pennsylvania, and he originally started with a country group. It was Bill Haley and the Saddlemen, and then when he saw rock and roll, took the Saddlemen and made him into the Comets.
The term rock and roll goes back to the early part of the 20th century at least. And there was a record that came out, a blues record by Trixie Smith, came out in 1923 called My Man Rocks Me with One Steady Roll. It's interesting to note that a white remake of that record in 1925 by Harold Ortley and his Ohio Collegians changed one word to turn rock and roll from...
That I grew up listening to because, you know, I was a child of the 50s really, was Jerry Lee Lewis, Elvis Presley, basically all the American rock stars. And through listening to that music and through my interest in playing the guitar, I kind of discovered that music was really American rhythm and blues music.
The Negro has had a major influence on the total culture of America, which of course, as I say, in American music is the greatest influence on the world.
Early rock and roll was, was still taken off of really rhythm and blues.
The best thing I think about Alan Freed is the fact that he never played the cover versions of records. He would stick to the original black versions. So he would play Shaboom by the Corrs and not by the Crew Cuts, or Little Darlin' by the Gladiolas and not by the Diamonds. And so I thought he was like amazing to be that powerful and to stick to the real music.
One reason why Alan Freed has remained popular, he was sort of the patron saint of rock and roll, was that he stayed true to the black roots of those early records, just at a time when cover versions were taking over the market. The funny thing, by 1954 and 55, you could look at the top 10 and probably about 5, 6, 7 of the records were white remakes of rhythm and blues songs.
Eventually, Freed moved the group to the preeminent blues label of the 1950s and 60s, Chess Records. Their first session was one of the most productive in the history of the label, yielding 13 songs, including one of the biggest hits in Chess Records history, Sincerely. The single rode the R&B listings for 20 weeks and sold over 250,000 records. The Moonglows became one of the earliest R&B groups to see an original song picked up by a pop act, when the white vocal trio, the McGuire Sisters, covered Sincerely and got a #1 hit.
The people that really controlled the airwaves were sort of terrified of the black threat. It was too independent. There were a lot of small labels that were putting out these black records. And so the major labels would usually try and steal the hits. So like Sincerely by the Moonglows, it would be covered by McGuire Sisters, or Pat Boone built his entire career on covering black records just when they started to hit.
This white dude says, this is degrading, this is not for our kids, and we can't have this kind of garbage, this black music on radio and television. This is just corrupting our kids and stuff.
Set up a 20-man committee to do away with this vulgar, animalistic, nigger rock and roll bop.
The Righteous Brothers had a lot of trouble getting our music played. The early stuff, they said it was too rock and roll, too hard rock and roll. But they were really saying it sounds black and we can't play it.
The song Shake, Rattle, and Roll was first recorded in 1954 by Big Joe Turner. Bill Haley and the Comets' cover version, released later that year, contained sanitized lyrics and a less bluesy, more pop-sounding arrangement.
I said shake, rattle, and roll.
The obscenity and vulgarity of the rock and roll music is obviously a means by which the white man, his children, can be driven to the level with a nigger. It is obviously nigger music. It is obviously nigger music.
His first #1 hit record wouldn't be released until April 21st, 1956. But starting back in 1954, a truck driver from Memphis, Tennessee, was laying down some groundbreaking tracks at Sun Records.
Elvis came in after hearing some of the things that I had produced for a number of years on black people.
Elvis stole his whole flow, bar for bar.
Well, they showed him the song, and
Elvis, they would play the song through, yeah.
And then he recorded the tune as it was.
Now, we were talking about this afternoon. Is it true that when he heard you performing the material, that he would imitate your style when he recorded the song?
Well, they did come out very close to the demos that we did.
Did you feel funny about him imitating so closely what you were putting on tape, or not?
Well, no, I felt a little funny the first time, and after he sold 4 million, I didn't.
And this will be Don't Be Cruel, as it was initially written, by Mr. Otis Blackwell. Otis, go on over there and do this for us.
You know I can't be found, sitting home all alone, and if you can't come around, well, at least please telephone. Don't be cruel to a heart so true.
And that's what makes white America popular with the world. Because before that, they weren't popular. They were just known for bombing people, for being Nazis, for putting Japanese in internment camps. They weren't popular at the time. Rock and roll helped bring them out of that racial category. And they almost messed it up with the whole civil rights thing. Even though the civil rights thing was a media push, it still helped white America because everybody else knows the difference. And the enemies of America would love nothing better but to know that this group is over there and that this group is over there. Because the only reason they're not bombing America is because black folks is here, man. Or I should say bombing America like they're bombing Israel. Because they don't know the difference. All they know is what they were presented with. All they know is Malcolm X went over there as a representative for the Negroes in America, and their relationship was great. Their diplomacy was great. All they know is that when the white Americans go over there, people start dying. They start losing family members. So they know there's a difference between Americas. So they're starting to pick up on the fact that, oh, the things that make white Americans popular actually came from black Americans. And the rabbit hole is about to open up a little farther where they get a chance to see that goes with all the inventions and the invention of the government itself. And that the Negroes in America by no means are, beyond flaw, but are the only ones with the capacity to share, like they're sharing now, the American way. Nobody shares with the Negroes the way the Negroes share with everybody else. And that is a big piece of evidence on how America got its reputation for being an all-inclusive government. Because we know that the minute white people get a little power and they get the majority of the people in their party, they want to segregate everybody. They want the best of everything, and they want to leave everybody else with the least of everything and be able to status quo their neighbors in a competitive spirit. That's just how they do. But that's the limit of it. They didn't never enslave no people. They ain't no slave masters that illegally human traffic a bunch of Africans. They didn't exterminate the Native Americans. They didn't steal no land from Mexico. And they didn't do and they didn't go around the world creating a whole bunch of colonial bullshit. Because when the people who created the colonies went around the world, their reputation was the sun never set on the British Empire, and it wasn't because they were bullies. It wasn't because they were bullies. It was for the same reason that Malcolm X was loved in all those nations when he went. It's the same reason that hip-hop artists and sports players, the black sports players and hip-hop artists, are loved everywhere they went. The same reason Jesse Owens was loved when he went to Germany and visited the Nazi regime. He was loved. They took care of him. That's why the sun never set on the British Empire. Because the British Empire didn't rely on natural resources to build up their treasury. They relied on industry and export. Industry and export. Strictly. And the labor wasn't free because we're paying for it now. But the Europeans that came over here, and the black and the white Europeans that came over here and put in their work for property, that was the biggest time when the treasury was able to reach its surplus. It was an act of charity. It was an act to extending the extra parts of your land as refugee camps for those who are having problems in their homeland. That's what built the treasury. An act of charity. That rhymes. That's what built the treasury, was an act of charity. That's what built the legacy, was an act of charity. Saying, okay, you guys are treating those people bad over there. Ottoman Empire, Muslims and Moors, you guys are treating white people bad over there. We got enough room. Why don't you bring them over here? We're going to help them become a nation. We're going to help them get on their feet. That act of charity built the treasury and the prosperity and the legacy of the British Empire, who are really Negroes that are Cherokee and Ebony. Yeah, but it wasn't what they're using now. It wasn't oil. America, the money that's been used to fund World War I, World War II, and all of these world wars since was not built off oil money. Oil money did not become a factor for USA Inc. until after World War II. So what was established as economics to build the treasury, the British pound, the American dollar, was not created off of oil. So it's not going to end off of oil. The American greenback was created off of the innovation of the Negro Indians, the British. Wasn't built by warfare. So there isn't anybody who's going to be able to come take over, and even if they are just trustees in the offices, in the seats of office right now for America, they're not going to be able to just take over and change the dynamics and the economics of the country unless they change it by that which it was built with. And that's why they're being punished. It's karmic, and that's why they're being punished. They never thought that they would see the day when they're getting treated like they was treating Gaza. Them Americans over there never thought that they would see the day when their structures and facility were getting treated, are getting treated like Iraq and Afghanistan and Kuwait. And they have this coming all over the world because they blaspheme the name of God. They blaspheme the name of us as Indians. They blasphemed us as Americans. And they blasphemed us as the Hebrews and as the Jews. And with each of those holy sacred names, Indian, American, and Jew, they took it and went around the world and used the energy contrary to the energy that those names were built with. Because America and Israel are one, not because of what you think. It's because Israel, Egypt, Babylon, Assyria, and Canaan are actually really in America and not over in the Middle East. Literally. So they're paying for their blasphemy. And as they're paying for their blasphemy and getting blasted, it's opening up the light on who's really who. America and Israel look like the Wizard of Oz right now, hiding behind the curtain. The propaganda's not working no more. The little temper tantrums and bratty tactics that are used on other cultures does not work. It doesn't work no more. And the only reason it was allowed to work is because they were given a special adoption that we call naturalization. The scriptures call it proselytization. But that's what Thanksgiving was about. They were proselytized, naturalized. And from then, they've always copied our ways. That's what the reason that you seen white children having black nurses wasn't because of no force. It was part of the naturalization. It was part of the colonization. It was part of the healing of the colon. The gastro inflammation that was occurring. Only way it could be killed was through breast milk. So they were given a special gift. They were given our spirit for real. And that's the only reason they are successful in the shit that they do. But in trying to break down this nation, they will never be successful because they have to use the same tactics to break it down as it was built up. And they don't have that in their arsenal. That's not part of their anthropological disposition to be able to provide service for that long without demanding something. Well, it's all about what makes you high. You see little black kids and how we can go off in the zone and just zone out and stay self-propelled. I mean, some people on drugs, some people not on drugs. Come to find out, somebody can self-propel all day by just doing music with themselves. Call it beatboxing and doing music. Next thing you know, you have a joint, you got a joint and some music in your head. You can fuck around and spend 8 hours without even eating or drinking water or really demanding much of a natural resource. But when you take that to the macro level and you're producing for economics and you have that same principle, you can just produce and produce and produce without demanding something. Well, you can put something away in the treasury. And that's how this was built. Those are the tactics used. They're not using those tactics. They want something for intellectual property, mechanical property, and then for some invisible shit. Then birthright property. So it's all take. But when you got a drug habit, you have to take. They just don't want, they're ashamed of what their drugs are. They're ashamed of what their drugs are. And that's one of the reasons you see a lot of people saying the Epstein files is the reason why Trump started this war. Because some people's drugs are other people. And not in the way you think. And not in the way you think. Really gruesome. It could be really pleasurable or really gruesome. But the gruesome side seems to hold the larger percentage though. But the only reason you wouldn't be able to mass produce without a demand is if you're on drugs, is what I'm getting at. You have to have a drug habit. They're just ashamed of what their drugs are. And their drugs is the same drug as a vampire's drug. Which goes back to why they had colon problems in the first place when they immigrated over here. Because blood, the uric acid of blood will rip a hole in your gastrinal or your gastric lining. Right. So that's what I mean by anthropology. It's anthropological for a polar bear to eat blood, but it's anthropological for a panda bear to eat all vegetables. It's anthropologic that most Negroes are lactose intolerant. Yeah, so everybody needs to be dealt with. I mean, the Constitution hints towards that. When it talks about a separate and equal station, it's talking about anthropological differences, not necessarily physical differences. Because if you live in the same state, you have already crossed the borders. If you live in the same city, you already crossed the border. So when the Constitution is talking about separate and equal, it's not talking about physical boundaries. It's talking about cultural boundaries, but cultural boundaries only based off of anthropological needs through medicine or through diet. And once you start eating out of law, matter of fact, the Lenin and Stalin used cannibalism as an excuse to start wiping out all the Europeans in Russia. That was their excuse. Their excuse was, since they performed cannibalism, even though they confiscated all their food, they took all their food and everything valuable they had, they could feed themselves, so they could perform cannibalism. And once they performed cannibalism, they used that as an excuse to declare war and genocide upon those people for war crimes, because they convicted them of culturally, as a nation, committing cannibalism. And this is what, 1921. So anthropology has always been a part of law. Matter of fact, the whole poisoning somebody and with a malicious intent or manslaughter has to do with anthropology. Poison ivy isn't poison ivy to everybody. To some people, it's just ivy. To some people, it's poison ivy. Poison sumac isn't poison to everybody. To some people, it's poison sumac, and other people, it's just sumac. You see what I mean? So that anthropology is what determines how you function in society. And if you're not performing according to the your identification and what that says, you will be removed and replaced with that which is real. And that's what we're seeing with America and Israel right now. That's what we're seeing right now. You said you was Big Mean Joe Brown. You said you was Leroy Brown. And you went over there and they didn't do it once to him, they did it twice. Can you imagine you getting all your homies or the heads of your family to come meet with some people and they bomb on you guys and the place gets shot up and they say, oh man, that wasn't us, that wasn't us, that wasn't us. And then they say, man, no, that wasn't us, we heard the shots too, we had to run too. And they say, well, let's meet again. And you go back and meet again and they get shot up again. Come on, what you gonna do? What you gonna do? You gonna let loose. All your hitters is out on them. It's drill time. Everybody on one. So what you think they did after the second time? So I mean, you know, a bully's biggest mistake is not knowing when to say when. One of a bully's biggest mistakes is not knowing when to say when. They're not satisfied with the emotional battle being won. They want to do something physical and back the opponent down into a corner and force them to fight. And a large percentage out of the time, when someone's forced to fight a bully and they give it their all, they usually walk away with a clean slate. They usually never get bullied again. And then that bully is shown up all throughout school, and nobody ever does nothing to the bully necessarily after that, but it will never be able to bully nobody else again. That's what's happening to America and Israel as we speak right now. They forced them people into a rock and a hard place and forced them to punch. And so now they don't want to quit punching, though. So now we're going to see if your reputation precedes you. And the only thing that can save this new America is British America. Meaning the only thing that can save white America is black America, Negro America. Because once again, the definition of America is this: I'll just say the first 4 words. Look it up in any dictionary, what the definition for an American is. And it says the copper-colored races. And I'm gone.